Hello, I'm Mark, and I'm trying to create an original science fiction setting called Dawn of Victory. I also have the great pleasure of being part of a YouTube channel / interdimensional research facility called the Templin Institute. And over on that channel, we've just published a video discussing the theoretical questions you might need to ask yourself if you, like me, are interested in building this type of expanded universe. If you want to hear me discuss the theories and ideas I think you should consider in your world building when constructing a sci-fi setting, I'd suggest you check that video out. Because in this one, I'm putting all those theories and ideas into practice and showing you all the choices I made and the questions I considered when starting to world build the Dawn of Victory universe. If you're here mainly because you want to learn about my science fiction setting and how it's going to work, you're in the right place. First, I'll start with subgenre, tone, and focus, all the nebulous, hard-to-define elements that give this setting its feel. Next, we'll go through what I consider to be the essential elements of most standard sci-fi settings: their geography, time frame, technology, aliens, politics, and conflict. For each one, I'll discuss how they'll work in Dawn of Victory and why I made the decisions I did. And the particularly attentive among you might have noticed that some of these categories were already touched on when I first announced this project. Geopolitics, in particular, is a major pillar of my setting. In those cases, I'll be focusing more on discussing certain decisions I made or providing some firmer details while sticking mainly to a high-level overview at this early stage. Starting with subgenre, tone, and focus, Dawn of Victory aims to be part of that darker, grittier side of science fiction, incorporating elements of military sci-fi, alternate history, and Lovecraftian horror. It has a serious tone similar to the real world, where even the most fantastical elements are approached with a grounded sense of realism. Its focus is centered on geopolitics and ideology, and specifically how they affect many of the more common tropes associated with the standard sci-fi setting. Now, this isn't something I just decided, but the result of what I've called my core pillars, a blend of themes, tenets, and inspirations that shape your world building. It's also what I discussed at length in our original announcement video, so I'll spare you another deep dive into my influences and core pillars here. Instead, let's move into geography. First and foremost, Dawn of Victory takes place in our own galaxy, featuring Earth and humanity as we know it. When it comes to science fiction settings, I absolutely love seeing speculative future history that imagines where our civilization will be in a few hundred years. Totally distinct universes like Homeworld and Star Wars can be fun, but I always see them as a bit of a sideshow. I want to know what's going on with Earth. Now, this is the decision that is probably the most impactful for all of Dawn of Victory, and as we move along with this series, you'll see how it affects other categories, especially geopolitics, on our list here. In terms of the geographic extent of our setting, it covers only a tiny region of the Milky Way galaxy that nevertheless contains thousands of stars and hundreds of planets. This area represents the total extent of human exploration and is called the Orion Arm. The rationale guiding that choice is that I want Dawn of Victory as a setting to feel vast and expansive, a wide-open sandbox, yet not so massive that it starts to feel overwhelming. With geopolitics at the center of this setting, it's also important that no matter how many star systems we include, they should all be able to fit on a map, and that imposes its own kind of constraints. Now, we're still building that star map at the moment and live streaming our progress over at the Templin Institute, but at the moment, it looks like we're headed towards roughly 2,000 star systems encompassing the entirety of the Orion Arm. This to me feels pretty good, right around where I want it. I complain about Halo a lot, but the scale of the conflict between the UNSC and the Covenant is really inspiring to me. It was awesome to see an interstellar war play out across not a single system or a group of star systems, but an entire front extending across hundreds of systems. I want that same sense of scale in Dawn of Victory, and I think this helps us get there. And yet I think that by limiting ourselves to this number, whatever it ends up being, we're creating the conditions for the Orion Arm to slowly, gradually be filled out in a way that a more galactic setting couldn't be. Whenever Star Wars needs a new star system, they can just invent one. Dawn of Victory doesn't have that option, so we got to expand on what's already there. And the hope is that as we continue to work on this universe, maybe bringing on an expanded team of writers, they'll all be working within the same region with the same constraints, so certain sections of the Orion Arm, certain star systems, planets, cities, etc., might eventually become far more developed and deep than their equivalents in a larger galactic-sized setting where you're always free to invent more space. Hopefully, by taking the middle-of-the-road approach, we'll get the best of both worlds, a setting that feels vast and expansive, but also with the true richness of detail. Next up, time frame. The modern year in Dawn of Victory is 2285. Our setting includes a vast interstellar civilization, a human population nearing 100 billion, and advanced technologies like faster-than-light travel, cybernetics, and terraforming. To me, 261 years from the moment of recording feels like a mostly reasonable amount of time for all these things to have happened. And even though realistically humans 261 years from now will likely have significantly different languages, cultures, and societies, it doesn't feel so far into the future that we can't get away with having everyone mostly act and speak like 21st century humans. I don't want to imply that humanity in DOV is stagnant in any way, but I also want to keep it accessible. To help accomplish this, I've employed a few tricks. Technically, this setting is an alternate history, with a point of divergence in 1933, and so we're able to plant a few seeds further back into our own history to help things progress the way we want them to. In Dawn of Victory, faster-than-light travel and many other discoveries have already been made by the 2020s, so interstellar civilization can develop faster than it otherwise would have. But as for why the year 2285 and not 2286 or 2279, will allow me to quickly reveal all my secrets. I was born in 1988, but tried to avoid using the number 88, and especially in a project like this. If you know, you know. My original solution was to use 89, because 9 is the coolest number. In Halo it's 7, in DOV it's 9. But I kinda want something important to happen in 2289, something the setting will progress towards as we develop it, so we needed to go back a few more years. The first Godzilla movie I ever saw was The Return of Godzilla, or more specifically the American release Godzilla 1985, so there we go, 2285. Nobody ever accused every element of world building of being super interesting, but that's my process. But this date also allows for a useful, hopefully intuitive trick that I think is pretty brilliant. This setting is inspired by the Cold War and World War II. If you find that cool, I'm willing to bet most of you have at least a rough understanding of 20th century history. You know vaguely what happened between the 30s and early 90s, and so by having the modern year in DOV be essentially the 80s, just with a couple of 2s in front of it, you'll be able to use real-world history as a sort of reference point to what's happening in our timeline. It's already been very useful in developing it, especially in trying to understand the realistic progression of geopolitics across a few decades. Technology, by contrast, is something I've spent very little time thinking about in this setting. Right now, its main use is just solving the inherent plausibility issues of any standard sci-fi setting, like how faster-than-light travel is possible, or artificial gravity, terraforming, and whatever else. Technology did it. Eventually, that will begin to change. Interstellar warfare and space combat are two arenas where I'd like to really highlight the technology being used and how it affects doctrines and outcomes. Megacorps are also an aspect that I think would benefit from some extensive technological world building. But for the most part though, I don't think Dawn of Victory is really about that. Technology in this setting should fade into the background most of the time, and when it rises to the forefront, it should be because of how it interacts with the main focus of DOV, geopolitics and ideology. How communists, fascists, capitalists, and imperialists approach artificial life and sentient robots is something I think might be a cool avenue to explore later down the line. At this stage though, technology is on the back burner. Alien life is at the heart of Dawn of Victory. It's responsible, after all, for propelling human civilization along its new trajectory, but it's also something I want to keep in the background, at least for now. I am a passionate fan of Star Trek, Star Wars, Mass Effect, and a new fan of Babylon 5, and so many other science fiction universes in which you'll have aliens and humans sitting around at a bar chatting about life. I love this style of aliens. But I don't think anyone would claim it's exactly realistic, and for a gritty sci-fi universe like DOV, it feels wrong. My approach to aliens in this setting is instead inspired by the movie Sphere, or rather a piece of dialogue. That movie was kind of bad.
Has it occurred to anyone that maybe we shouldn't open that door?
Why are you saying that?
Well, we always assume these creatures will be green or insect-like, but basically human. But what if they inhale air and exhale cyanide gas? It's perfectly plausible.
Or live forever like a virus or a yeast.
But why would you assume that an unknown life form would want to kill us?
A creature that can't be killed wouldn't think killing was right or wrong. It simply wouldn't have a concept of it.
Watching that scene as a kid kinda blew my mind and created an annoying voice in the back of my head that complains whenever it sees a Romulan or a Twi'lek or whatever. I like when science fiction shows truly alien aliens, something that doesn't look like you, that might not perceive existence in the same way you do. Something that if it actually took the seat at the bar next to you, would probably terrify you and maybe offend your very existence.
Contact teams meeting an unknown life form, or ULF, must be prepared for severe psychological impact. Stress reaction when confronted by unknown life has not been sufficiently studied and cannot be entirely predicted in advance. But the most likely consequence of contact is absolute terror.
But as for specifics, here's what I'm comfortable giving away. Alien life exists in DOV. It existed on Earth, too, for 220 years until it was nuked from orbit. Aside from that, though, there's plenty of alien grasses and trees, and many worlds have naturally developed ecosystems even if they're primitive by Earth standards. These planets might have weird creatures from benign to the truly monstrous and predatory. Fighting swarms of alien bugs and bestial aliens is such a fun part of sci-fi, I'd hate to cut it from DOV entirely. As for sentient, intelligent alien life, that too exists, but needs to be incorporated in a very specific way, some of which must remain a mystery for a bit longer. But I can say that X-Files has been an unexpected source of recent inspiration in this regard, both in its Monster of the Week episodes and its government conspiracies. Next, geopolitics, my beloved. This is one of the elements I consider a core pillar of the DOVoverse, and something I've talked about in detail. So let's move away from theory and inspiration and into some firm numbers. The intent of Dawn of Victory is to replicate the sophistication of geopolitics in our own world, but across an interstellar scale. It is a multipolar universe in which many different nations are competing for influence and power, and doing so through a web of alliances, treaties, and conflicts. So to accomplish this, our setting needs a ton of factions. Modern geopolitics are driven by roughly 200 sovereign states. I'm aiming for 400 in Dawn of Victory. The exact numbers are still coming together, but right now we're looking at roughly 4 superpowers, 20 or so great powers with potential superpowers among them, 30 to 60 regional powers, 100 to 200 middle powers, with the remainder being small powers. These will share the Orion Arm with a multitude of intergovernmental institutions, megacorporations, non-governmental organizations, non-state actors, and other influential entities. The aim here is that we can take any region of our setting, whether an entire section of the Orion Arm encompassing a few hundred stars, or even just a single cluster, and have the potential for compelling geopolitical narratives. Naturally, some factions will inevitably have more lore than others, and this is where the decision to have the DOV setting take place in our own universe using real-world nations and ideologies is really gonna help. If I tell you the Republic of Acadia is a Talgethian nation fighting a Jornash insurgency while seeking closer ties to the Kalkepa Federation, I'm not saying much. But if I say the Republic of Acadia is a fascist nation fighting a communist insurgency while seeking closer ties to the United States, I don't need to provide any additional context before you already know a few key things about this nation. This approach leverages our inherent understanding of modern ideologies and dynamics to quickly convey relationships and conflicts in DOV. And the primary conflict in Dawn of Victory is the Cold War, an enormous, growing confrontation between 5 ideologically distinct blocks where the moves and counter-moves have become so interwoven and pervasive that it shapes nearly every aspect of humanity's interstellar relations. In world-building terms, the Cold War is DOV's defining element, and I've started to think of it as a sort of filter or lens, maybe. You take the usual tropes and concepts that exist within the standard sci-fi setting, push them through Dawn of Victory's Cold War filter, and end up with, hopefully, a unique take. Space pirates in Dawn of Victory have the potential to be a good example of this. I think many settings include them mainly because they're an expected trope of the genre, and who can blame them? But piracy relies on a specific set of circumstances to be profitable, and not every setting has those. And yet, if you take the general concept of space pirates and push them through the Cold War filter, well, now space pirates aren't some romanticized anachronism, but a potential tool for statecraft with uses in proxy warfare, blockade running, privateering, psychological warfare, dissident recruitment, denial of resources, undermining alliances, and fostering internal conflicts, and just generally more plausible. Megacorps, rebel alliances, cybernetics, artificial intelligence, and plenty of other usual suspects within the standard sci-fi setting also get a pretty nice makeover when you filter them through DOV's central Cold War. But as we arrive at the end here, I should reiterate that these in no way represent the totality of my thoughts for any of these sections. What I've tried to do instead is cover many of the big choices and decisions that I made in the early days when I was just planning things out and how they'll hopefully set things up for future success. As we move forward, we'll be exploring all of this in more detail and our next episode will be a deep dive into geopolitics. This is something I've already spent plenty of time talking about, but there's plenty more to say, so if you have any specific questions about how geopolitics will work in this setting, please let me know in the comments. And until next time, remember, peace through strength.